Hello and welcome to episode 1 of The Outside Fence, brought to you by teachmehorseracing.com. I'm your host Tristan Heffernan, and joining me is Stewart Balls Brown. How are you, Balls? I hope the punt treated you well on the weekend.
A small win for myself. It's good to be joining you, Hef.
Now, that was a bit of a Dorothy Dixer, because I know how we went on the weekend, because we were going to film the first episode last week and we both did our balls on the punt. So we decided we'll have a week off where we don't have to think about racing for too much, and then we'll get stuck into it. But finally, we're up and going. We're going to have a look at a few races from Flemington. First of all, we might just do a little intro on each other. You can see we've got our Twitter handles there below. Balls, just give us a little run through on sort of what got you into racing and what sort of racing you like betting on.
Yeah, so I've been a fan mainly of thoroughbred racing for the large majority of my life. Sort of, it's been a little bit of family history there, and also friends that have been into it, including Hef. So that's sort of been bitten by the bug, and it continues to this day. I worked at Betfair for the best part of 10 years previously, and obviously that was a great job at the time, but now I've moved on from there, and here I am.
Beautiful. For those who don't know, I worked with you at Betfair I didn't get through the 10 years, I was about 7 years, but they were fun times. We've both been punting on the races for at least 20 years, I reckon. I've got the little silks in the back. We've been part owners of racehorses down here in Hobart, and whereas Balls, you like concentrating more on Melbourne, I'm sort of pigeonholed myself on Tassie racing for better or worse over the past number of years. But we're going to look at Flemington from the angle of going forward, what we can sort of pick up with these horses going forward, and also just highlight a few angles that might help you with your own punting. So, we might get stuck into the Creswick from Saturday. First of all, Flemington on Saturday, Balls, what did you think of the track?
Well, going into the meeting, I expected the fence to not be the place to be in both the circle races and the straight races, and it pretty much played out like that. It probably wasn't as savage in the circle races as I expected, as the predicted rain didn't hit, and so the track was a bit drier than expected. It sort of played almost on the better side of a slow 5, but most of the races were won by horses that were off the fence, bar race 8, which Heptagon won, but that was run at a really slow tempo, and probably assisted horses that were saving ground on the inside, as opposed to making that wide run. As far as the straight races went, they were sort of close to the outside fence. Sort of most of the 3 straight races, they were probably sort of 3, 4, and 5 horses off the inside around that area, off the outside, around that area in the straight, and they all sort of huddled over into that area.
Okay, cool. We'll keep that in mind as we look at these races then. I'm a massive one for track bias. Are you a big proponent for track bias, Balls?
I am, yeah. It's obviously vitally important, even if you aren't playing in the early races on a program, to make sure you're just keeping an eye on them to see where the winners and place getters are coming from, and maybe where sort of horses in the market, if they're settling and not performing, maybe there can be track bias there, and obviously if you can identify it nice and early, can give you an edge in the market. Okay,
beautiful. The Creswick Stakes. We'll bring up the replay now. This is won by a horse called Front Page, and I'll admit I hadn't heard of this horse before. I'm a fan more than a real devotee of the mainland races. Here we go. Did you manage to find the winner here, Balls?
I didn't. I fell into the favourite myself, King of Hastings, and had something small on Alberk as well, who didn't run too badly. But this was a dominant win by Front Page. It's there in the sort of bright green colours towards the outside. Probably the only horse that's still under a bit of a hold at the moment. It was a hard horse to assess coming into the race, as it had come off a couple of very soft wins at Wangaratta and then Country New South Wales as well. And hadn't done a huge amount on the clock, but there was obviously more to come from it. So I found it a hard horse to assess, and sort of just decided just to have a look at it on Saturday, I suppose. And obviously I didn't expect it to win by that margin. As you can see, it was quite a bunch finish behind it. And if you would have seen on the replay there, this third horse, Merited, shifted out quite abruptly in the straight and sort of put pay to the chances of a few other horses, such as the favourite, King of Hastings, Broadway in fourth, and I'm Eloquent as well. But they all were only just going at the time, so I don't really think it had much of an effect on the result. In the end, the winner was just far too good.
Okay, so we've heard 7-figure offers for the winner from Hong Kong. Extremely impressive win, but it's a lot of money. Would you be selling?
I'm always a proponent of selling when the money's there. Obviously, you're going to be wrong sometimes. There's been a few examples, say, of a horse who turns into a champion and it does look a good buy, but I think over the journey, you would be better off taking the money, and definitely with this horse, I'd take the money. As I said, it was a dominant winner on the weekend. It did put up a good figure according to punting form, but the opposition behind it, I'm not sure how good they are or whether they performed their best on the day as well. So might have been assisted by that.
Okay, a bit flattered. So let's talk about the favourite, King of Hastings. You obviously thought it was a worthy favourite, but it was beaten quite a fair way there. Could you find any excuses for his performance?
I couldn't really. As I said, it did suffer some interference when Merited shifted out around the 200-metre mark, but the horse was struggling at the time. It was weird. Like I assumed the horse would get cover in the race, and I think it races better like that. So maybe that's a bit of an excuse for it. It had that sort of dreaded in-between run down the straight where you're not leading, but then you don't have cover type thing. It's a run I don't like horses to have because it feels like they're always having to work into the race a bit. The horse has performed well down the straight previously, but that was, as I mentioned, with cover. So that may be something looking forward that for next time you could excuse that run.
Okay, maybe not all lost there with King of Hastings, but no doubt front page took all honours there. Last two winners of this race, a couple of big names, Guitra and Nature Strip.
Yeah, it is. So, if front page can turn into either of those horses, then they'd be wise not to sell, I suppose. But it's just a bit of an interesting fact that two sort of future Group 1 winners have come out of this race in the last 2 years, which will be interesting to see what happens with front page now.
It's quite rare for an off-season race, I guess, to throw them up. Anything else to take out of the race?
Not really at this stage. A lot of these horses, this probably would have been their grand final for them. So they'd either, I suppose, go to the paddock or they might pop up in a race. There's another meeting at Flemington in 2 weeks' time, so maybe they might pop up there, or they might just have a break and come back in a few months. Okay,
cool. We're going to have a look at the George Watson quality now. That was the staying race on the program. Any joy on the punt here, Balls?
No, there wasn't. This was a bit of a heartbreaking race for me, to be honest. I was quite keen on Chapada, who broke a long run of outs last start. And watching the race in the run, I was very happy as he had every possible chance. Loomed early in the straight, which he may have hit the front too soon, which could have been an issue for him, but it's hard to find an excuse for Chapada. I just think he was beaten by a better horse on the day, and that better horse in the blue colours down the outside with the black cap is Lord Belvedere. Interesting horse, Lord Belvedere. He won very impressively at this track and distance at the end of last prep, and looked a very promising stayer, and then I think he had an injury since and had a fair while off. He returned with 2 runs, both on unsuitable wet tracks, and they were both on days where it was hard to make ground, which wouldn't have suited him over the shorter distances. And he went into this race with 49 days between runs, which you can find the Mar Eustace stable can do this a bit, particularly with their European horses. They tend to space their runs and then they can perform off there. Going to the race, I was pretty confident that Lord Belvedere was the best horse in the race, but it's just that prep that I wasn't sure about. And I suppose in the end, when it was $15 or $16, I probably should have at least had something on it. But I did feel this. There's another race in 2 weeks' time at Flemington over the 2600, the Banjo Patterson final, and so I felt Lord Belvedere would be cherry ripe for that, and maybe sort of just needing the run. So the fact he's won on Saturday probably is a good sign for 2 weeks' time, but you're probably not going to get much of a price.
Yeah, great. We can all pile in at the 6-4 instead of the $16. Then that's wonderful news.
Yes, the big SP might be some hope for us punters in 2 weeks' time. There might be a price.
So that point you raised about his prep leading into the race, I know personally a big break between runs like that in staying races has always been a major negative, but we've started to see some stables able to do it. The obvious one's Russian Camelot in the Derby, who seemed really easy to oppose and was just firm as anything and won like a champion. Is there any advice you think maybe for looking at these horses off the big breaks? Is it all down to the stable?
I think that's probably the number one thing, is to, I suppose, know your stables and what they can and can't do with their horses. And I suppose also the history of the horse can come into it as well. This horse, Lord Belvedere, had won off a 35-day break before. So I suppose that could have put it in its favour as well. But also, I suppose Russian Camelot's the same. They're both European-bred horses who, I suppose, can be trained differently. They can sort of take less time to get fit and those sort of things. And so that's something that you can take into account. Another thing that was a big part of this race was the at about the 1200 metre mark, Starcaster, who is a very keen going horse, and Friedman stable haven't been able to get this to settle all prep, was keen again on a Saturday, and they just let it run at the 1200, and it really put some pace into the race and probably put pay to a lot of those horses that were racing on the speed, and sort of set it up for the likes of Chapada and Lord Belvedere that was sitting off the speed. So there's probably a few horses on the speed that you can forgive from the run, but the issue with them is that now they have had that sort of hard run, that if they want to back up in 2 weeks' time, there's got to be a query on whether they come out of this run a bit flat or they can sort of spike off this sort of hard run. But I suppose you're only going to know those answers post their next run. So one horse that I did back on Saturday, or was quite keen to back as well in this race, was Alfaris. He had 2 runs back. They both were good runs over shorter distances. He won at this distance third up last prep as well, so he sort of had the timing for this time of race, and he sat outside the leader, and Starcaster really putting speed into the race at the halfway mark probably put pay to his chances. He was still okay. He only probably tied the last 150. Like, his run probably looks worse on paper than it was. And just having his first run at this sort of distance range for the prep, I'd expect him to have significant improvement. But as I mentioned before, he did have that hard run, so there's just a little query whether he will come out of it flat or not.
Okay, is that something the market might be able to tell us next start on how the horse has recovered? Or
it possibly could. I find also you're probably not going to get much out of the Hayes stable because they're generally pretty positive about everything. So I'd assume the horse, they'll say the horse as well and all that kind of stuff. So, maybe the market will have some intel, but you probably, I suppose you're just going to have to weigh up how keen you are on the horse. And also it might, if it can get into maybe like a slower run race or something like that, that could, I suppose, assist it as well.
Okay, so if we don't see are we going to see Starcaster there in a couple of weeks?
I'd expect it to go to the paddock now. They'd sort of take to the paddock and sort of start again, I'd assume, and maybe try some. They put a bit of gear on it on Saturday, and it obviously didn't work. They had earmuffs on it in the race. They tried that previously pre-race, but it's obviously with a good stable. So I'd expect if anyone can get it going again, or get it to sort of settle, it'd be the Friedman stable.
Okay, cool. we might. How about we find a race where we actually did find the winner balls? Was there any of them?
Yeah,
okay. We've got the Rod Johnson Handicap. We might go and have a look at this one.
Yeah, Cherry Tortoni. He looks a very promising horse.
Look like tie the knot. So
same colours.
They're in the red with the white cap there. How did you find this one?
Yeah, well, it was a very impressive winner. It only had one start for one win, but it was a very impressive winner at Sale on debut, and it had the Payne-Egan combination, which is flying and very easy to find at the moment. But yeah, it's that wide at Sale and sort of cruised up to them similar to this and put pay to them in a race that actually hasn't turned out to be a bad form race. So that's why I was pretty confident going to this race. And the thing you note about this race, it was an unbelievably slowly run race. They really sat up and it was just a pure sprint home. And Cherry Tortoni was in a great spot at sort of 3 wide, 1 back with cover, having the option to sort of go when it wanted to and get dragged nicely into the race. And it's got a superior turn of foot to a lot of those horses. So whilst you'd say it had a good run and every possible chance, there was still a lot of credit into the win. It's run the 10th best last 400 of the day and the 12th best last 200 as well. So, and as you can see, it was pretty easy on it over the final stages.
So those finishing sectionals are even more impressive, I guess, considering the amount of straight races on the program. So they're generally going to have the faster late sectionals. Is that fair to say?
Well, and especially as well, we'd expect there was a 1,000-metre race, a 1,100-metre race, and a 1,200-metre race. And so naturally you'd expect those to have the faster finishing times. And plus this being a race for 2-year-olds, if the 2-year-olds time-wise can mix it with the older horses, it's generally a good sign for them going forward.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Anything you spotted coming out of that race we might be able to follow?
So this race, a lot of these will line up in 2 weeks' time in the Gibson Carmichael, over 1,600. That race is over 1,400. So there's a few to look out for in that race. I suppose the horse that ran second, Alvarado, is a Savabeel colt from the Busson and Young stable, and they obviously know how to get a nice stayer. And this horse is bred for a bit of distance, and it looks the sort of horse that will get over distance. It did have every chance here on Saturday. It tracked the winner the whole way, but the winner just had a bit of a superior sprint to it. But Alvarado still finished off quite nicely, and I'd be surprised if he could turn the tables on Cherry Tortoni at 1,600, but obviously luck and running can come into it. So it wouldn't be without a chance. The major eye catcher was, if you watch on the replay again, would have been the horse in the Godolphin Blue down the outside, Ousa one. Now, it was very impressive running second to Alvarado at Ballarat on debut, finishing off hard. You can see it right out the back there. It was snagged from a wide gate here and sort of ridden conservatively. And it's out of screen for a lot of the straight here, but you'll notice its last 200 and then through the line, it was excellent. Sort of 50 metres, 100 metres past the post, it was up with the winners in the end. So it's one, if it gets to the mile next start, it'll definitely be one that's hard to beat. And even if it draws maybe a better gate, it could possibly settle a little bit closer. See, there it is right down the outside in the blue, and sort of rushes past a lot of them towards the end. There are a couple of hard luck stories in the race. Super Yulong, who's obviously probably got a bit unlucky with the Yulong in its name. They don't tend to win too many races, but it was another that was snagged from a wide barrier, and Mark Zara played for luck, looking for runs along the inside and through the field, and he didn't get that luck in the last 200 and was sort of held up behind a wall of horses and went to the line pretty much untested. So it's another, once it gets to the mile and a bit more luck, that could play a part. And a horse I also had a small bet on as well was Maui. It was coming out of the same race as Cherry Tortoni at Sale, where it didn't have a huge amount of luck there, found a bit of traffic and sort of took a while to get to the outside. And it was a bit of a similar story at Flemington. It had to race in between horses and just didn't get the opportunity to really wind up until sort of the race was gone. But it finished off okay, fourth best last 200 of the race, and the sort of horse would be suited to a stronger tempo, and then also the increase of the mile. But I do think if Cherry Tortini does go to the mile, they'll have their work cut out trying to beat it again, I think.
Okay. One thing I do know of the Gibson Carmichael being that it's usually the first time these 2-year-olds are all getting to the mile. It can throw up a bit of a different result. So it's a race that's thrown up some outsiders in the past. So
it can, yeah, it definitely can, and also it can a lot of the time it can be a totally different tempo as they get to a mile. They can generally a lot of horses can overdo it as 2-year-olds once they get to a mile, and we see here we had a really slow tempo race, whereas you might find it might be a fast tempo race in the Gibson Carmichael, which would, if that was the case, would bring in a lot of those horses that were finishing off strongly from out the back at the 1400.
Okay, beautiful. There's a bit to work with there. Going to Flemington in a couple of weeks. We've got somehow we got some viewer questions, even though we announced the show today on Twitter. I didn't think we'd get anyone watching, but we got a couple of questions. I've got one from Nico here, and he's a bit bemused why Brilliant Concept in race 1 came from some pretty weak races at some big starting prices and came to town and started favourite. What did you think of his chances on the weekend and how he performed?
Yeah, well, I actually found Brilliant Concept. Its last 2 wins have been excellent. It beat Persan, who at Ballarat 2 starts back, that had since won in town. Persan may not have been ideally suited that day, but it was still a fairly dominant win by Brilliant Concept. And then it was a pretty big win at Sandown the start after, where it was slowly away, circled the field, sitting 3 and 4 wide the trip, and just sort of kept progressing forward and kept going, and defeated Captain Harry, who'd been running okay at the time. The thing with the race on Saturday was it was a benchmark 90 in name. However, it was a restricted race, I think, to horses that had a certain number of country runs in the past 12 months. So there was obviously that restriction on it. So it was probably more a midweek class race than a proper benchmark 90 Saturday race. The issue with Brilliant Concept, I suppose, well, the query going into the race was that its last 2 wins were both on heavy tracks, and it was going to find a significantly firmer track on Saturday. It had prior form on firmer tracks, obviously at lesser levels, but it had shown it wasn't just purely a wet tracker. And also, as I mentioned at Sandown, it was slowly away. And on Saturday, again, it was very sluggish to get going at the start. Whilst I expected it to be on speed, be sort of in the first 3 or 4 horses, it actually settled last. They did go hard in the race, which enabled it to finish off okay, but it to the eye, it looked to be finishing off hard, and it finished off the best last 200 of the race. But if you want to look at meeting wide and sort of how slowly they did get home, it was the 75th fastest last 200 of the meeting. So it was sort of entitled to run on from where it was. As a personal preference, now that horse has missed a start, 2 back, was sluggishly away this start. It's not really a horse I want to be finding next start, or until I see it start to jump again and put itself in a position. I'd be very wary about following the horse from here on in.
Okay, that's interesting. Would you say that once these horses start missing the start, can they ever bring that back into preparation, or is that almost assigned as to we've got to wait for him to go to the paddock and come back and start again?
They can, but as you say, it might be something that's going on in their head or some kind of issue they have. And personally, I want to see them jump again before I entertain backing them.
Okay, cool.
So you get into those bad habits, and being slowly away, you're sort of on the back foot already, and it can be hard to win races from there. Yep.
Okay, very good. We've got one other question from Wol G on Twitter. Thank you, Wol. How do you get Crow's A-set? I don't know about you, Balls, but I don't know if anyone's ever got Crow's A-set until after the race. If you have any luck finding it, we wouldn't mind a copy either, Wol. All right, we might move on to some of my best graphics work here. Takeaway of the week. So every episode we're going to come up with something that we've either learnt on the weekend or it's reminding us, the weekend's reminded us of something that we might have forgotten or got caught out on. Balls, what can we take away from Flemington on Saturday?
Well, for starters, I thought this might have been a food segment for yourself.
It was going to be. I'm
one of your dinners.
I am a takeaway connoisseur, that's for sure. I tried to get a couple of images on the screen, but it just looked horrendous, so I went with a real basic green number. But we might. I know there's a couple of calls for me to incorporate some steak eating into this show at some stage, but we might just straighten it up to start with. What can you give us?
So as I've mentioned a couple of times, there's another Flemington meeting in 2 weeks' time where a lot of these horses will progress to that. So win a championship final day and there's a few other finals there. So a lot of the form will come from this meeting to there. It's worth noting for that day and from Saturday's meeting as well, I suppose, the SPs of all the horses, the various tempos of races, any difference in tempo between race to race. As I mentioned, that 2-year-old race is really slowly run. If it looks like it's going to be fast run race on Saturday, then you probably can, the format of the slowly run race, you're probably going to be a little bit wary trusting it fully. And the same goes, say, for that race that Lord Belvedere won. If there looks to be no speed in the race, in 2 weeks' time, then I'd be a little bit wary of the form out of Saturday's race. There's little intricacies that you probably need to just check on, particularly when, I suppose, the similar horses come up against each other again. And as I mentioned before, the SPs is obviously a big thing. You can always forgive a horse one bad run, and the SP is obviously all the market intelligence group together to give sort of the final opinion on the horse's chances. So that's obviously a very important part of it. A horse that I can give you an example for that I didn't find on Saturday, it was in the Lord Belvedere race and did start favourite, was Artie Lucas. Now, he was well backed on Saturday. I thought he was a big query at 2,500, but he's now had that sort of toughen up run at 2,500. And if he returns for the race in 2 weeks' time, he's going to have that. In the form, might say he only ran fair, but he did start favourite in the race over all those horses, and so that's definitely something to keep in mind. If the market sort of forgets about him a bit and he starts a fair bit bigger price, he's probably worth having something on purely on the fact that he did start favourite in what looks like the lead up race.
Okay, there's some very smart people betting on the races. We've got to cop the tip sometimes. That's what you're saying. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, always respect the market.
Okay, beautiful. I'll give you a little break from talking now. I've got a takeaway myself. Quite fitting, actually, that we started this week with the show called The Outside Fence, if no one really knows why we've called it that. A couple of Hobart boys, and if you've ever watched the races at Elwick, get those horses getting out to the outside fence in the home straight has been a real source of winnings for us over the years. We've even owned a few horses that have come right to the outside fence, and there's no better place to cheer them. So the first winter meeting here in Elwick on the new track after we had a few months off for Corona, and what did they do? First meeting back, they got ended up on the outside fence. But my takeaway on Sunday was from a track bias perspective, because I have to admit I got this track a little bit wrong during the day. As these horses were getting wide in the straight and the fence was obviously a no-go zone, I tended to play a bit too much towards the outside barriers. I looked back after the meeting and noticed that Barrier 1 actually had 2 wins and 4 placings from the 8 races. So only twice were they unplaced over the whole meeting, which is quite surprising considering all the horses wanted to get away from the inside. I'm going to bring the last race up here. It was won by GG Golden Lass. This was one of the winners from Gate 1. And on reflection, even though the horses wanted to get wide in the straight, it was the horses that were nearer the inside around the home bend who actually weren't losing ground, and then they were able to come wide in the straight when the fields were fanning. So when we're thinking about track bias, it's not so much leaders track back swoopers track, got to be on the fence, got to be wide. There can be little tricks, maybe not quite as pronounced as we've got here at Elwick, but you've got to be up with where you've got to be in all parts of the track. It's not as simple as saying we want to be wide all the way or we want to be inside all the way. There can be little things to play out, and there she goes, Gigi Golden Lass out on the outside fence. So that's my takeaway for the week. It probably stung home that I didn't back a horse drawn gate 1 earlier in the day that ended up winning, and after the race it looked pretty obvious. But yeah, just something to keep in mind with track bias moving forward, that it's more than just your basic inside, outside, front or back type scenario. That helped us get out a little bit on Sunday too, actually, Balls. Anyway, thanks for joining us there on that's a wrap for episode 1. Can we see you back next week, or are we going to have to rely on dodging a wipeout on the Melbourne races?
Yeah, well, it might be. Hopefully, it's good karma that I've come on today, and if the cheque arrives in the mail, then I'll probably be back next week.
Well, you won't be back if that's the case. Where are we racing next week in Melbourne?
At Caulfield.
Great.
Yeah, so I haven't actually had a look at the nominations yet, but I'm pretty sure the rail's out of fairway and they can get a bit ugly. So cross the fingers and hope for the best.
And if all else fails, back the leader in the 1400.
I think it'll be the 1440, given the rail's out.
All right, beautiful. Well, thanks, Balls, and hopefully we will see you next week for episode 2. If you liked the show, please get on and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or give us a like, or give us a bit of feedback on Twitter. We don't mind a bit of ribbing. It'd be nice to know if anyone's happened to watch. So I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully see you all next week. Thanks, Balls.
Thanks, Hef.